Hi, I'm Debby Montgomery Johnson, your host of Stand Up and Speak Up, a show that is about each and every one of us. Many of us have something we're hiding, something we're ashamed of, something that through no fault of our own or through our own making we keep hidden, and that in turn keeps us hidden from each other and the world. Good people go through terrible situations. Wise people know when and how to let it go. Everything that happens to us helps us grow. And while it may be hard to see it right away, the most important thing to do is to change your perception about your circumstances. Stand Up and Speak Up features ordinary people just like you and me who've been through extraordinary times and then found the courage to step out from behind their smiles and speak up about their experiences and the lessons gleaned from them. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is going to be an exciting conversation with my special guest, Brett Johnson. And Brett, are you there?
I am.
Yay! I'm so excited that you're here. I've been watching your YouTube videos all morning to get all psyched up for this interview because it is going to be an extraordinary discussion, but I want to tell people a little bit about who you are.
Okay.
And you told me that you work with cybersecurity, cybercrime, fraud. You're an identity theft expert, a keynote speaker, a consultant, a writer, a podcast personality, and this is the best, a former USA most wanted cyber criminal. Now, you probably don't want to be known by that because you are one of
Well, that's probably not the best.
But you're known as one of the top experts in the world on cybercrime, identity theft, fraud, and cybersecurity. And you gain this experience not through schooling, but through hands-on. And sometimes hands-on is the only way to learn. But we're here today because you know my organization that I work with, which is the Society for Citizens Against Relationship Scams or SCARS. It's an international organization that works with survivors, as I call them, victims of identity, well, there is identity theft, but relationship scams. And it's an international problem. And when I got introduced to you, I watched your YouTube video to AARP, and my mouth was just open. I'm like, who is this man? And the more I watched, and then I reached out to you, I'm thinking, he's really incredible. And there's so much to learn. Although part of me should really be angry with what you did, and that's
sure.
Not necessarily, I don't think you were involved in relationship fraud, but the scammers in general, I get so irritated at what they do. But when I found out about my scam, when it was revealed, all I wanted to know is, how did he do it? Or, as you would say, how did they do it? So we're going to launch into your story, and I want to kind of go back. The headline of America's Most Wanted was very intriguing, but I want to go back to your defining moments and hear your story. So what created Brett Johnson? Where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, you're right. I made the United States Most Wanted list. The United States Secret Service referred to me as the original Internet Godfather. The reason I referred to that or called that name is I built the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor to today's darknet and darknet markets, and it laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels still operate today. And, of course, that is not – I went to prison. I served 7.5 years. Had an escape during that time, but that is not where I began my life of crime. And before I start into that, I want people to know I do not blame my childhood on my choices as an adult. My choices as an adult are mine. I say that because I began my life of crime at 10 years old. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is one of these areas like the Panhandle of Florida, parts of Louisiana that if you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you may be involved in some sort of scam, hustle, fraud, whatever you want to call it. My mother was basically the captain of the entire fraud industry, and no crime too big or too small. From stealing a 108,000-pound Caterpillar D9 bulldozer She took a slip and fall in a convenience store, tried to sue the owner. She had a neighbor she used to pimp out. That was my mother. My father was not like that. My dad was a good man. The problem with him was he loved my mother so much that he became the enabler of the family. He was scared of losing her. If she came up with an idea, he would support it 100%. And she was an abusive parent. She could be physical, but her heart wasn't in that. It was more in the emotional, the verbal, the mental, the negligence. She used to bring men home in front of my father. He would sit there and cry and beg her not to do it. She'd do it anyway. She finally leaves him. At that point, we moved from Panama City, Florida, back to Hazard, Kentucky. That's where I'm from. And she kept up those partying ways. She would, I was 10, my sister Denise 9. She would leave us at the house. Sometimes she'd take us with her. She'd leave us in the car. We'd wait in the living room while she went and partied in the bedroom. But most of the time she left us at home. This one time I get the worst parts from my mom and my dad. I get the criminal mindset comes from my mom. The fear of being abandoned comes from my dad. So we'd been home alone for a few days, no food in the house, and I'd post up at the window seeing if Mom was driving down the street. Sometimes I'd walk out in the driveway to see if she was driving home. Denise, my sister, she was age 9 at the time. She was not like that. Denise was just the kid who was angry all the time. So we didn't have any food in the house. Denise walks in one day, and she's got this pack of pork chops in her hand, and I'm like, "Where'd you get that?" She's like, "I stole them." I was like, "Huh, show me how you did that." So she takes me over to A&P, and she shows me how she shoplifts food, and I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's do this. So we start stealing food. Look across the way, and there's a Kmart over there, and Kmart's got clothes, so we start stealing clothes, and then it becomes, this perverted form of Maslow's hierarchy of needs: books, games, jewelry, music, toys. Mom comes home after a few days, sees all the stolen loot we've got, asks where it came from. I stand up. We found it. She's like, "No, you didn't find that." My sister Denise, she stands up, 9 years old. She doesn't lie at all. She's like, "We stole it." My mom looks at my sister. She was like, "Show me how you did that." And she joins us. I say she joins us, but she actually starts running us as little shoplifters or distractions from shoplifters. She goes and gets her mother as well to join in, and we become this intergenerational shoplifting ring in eastern Kentucky. Used to take these road trips. They'd go to JCPenney and steal, clothes and jewelry. I'd go to the bookstore and steal books because that's the guy that I am. But that's the first crime I committed. And again, I don't blame my childhood on my choices as an adult. When I'm a minor, I can't help that. But as an adult, those are my choices. For example, my sister, other than that one shoplifting experience, she never breaks the law again. She goes off to be a great parent, great teacher, great citizen. Me, I'm just the guy who kept on going. And as I got older, I got more and more involved in the types of frauds and crimes that my mother and that side of the family was committing. So insurance fraud, benefit fraud, forgeries, charity fraud, stealing coal, any type of scam or fraud you could possibly imagine, I was involved in from age 10 up until I finally broke off on my own in the mid-'90s and went into internet crime. I faked a car accident to get the money, to get the insurance money, to get married, moved from Hazard, Kentucky to Lexington, Kentucky to go to school for English and theater. And again, I'm the guy who's afraid of getting abandoned all the time. I'm like my dad. I'm scared that the ones that I love will leave me. So I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, don't you worry about work or anything. I'll do the job. No, don't worry about cooking and cleaning. Yes, I can do all that and take a full-time class load as well." So here I am, 50 hours a week work, 18-hour class load, trying to do all the cooking and cleaning too, and couldn't do it. Something had to give. What gave was a job that, you still got to eat. So at that proclivity of fraud that I've already got, it's like, okay, what do we do? So I was doing some charity fraud at the time with the Kiwanis Club, had set up my own Kiwanis Club, as a matter of fact, was doing charity fraud, and then found eBay and knew there was some way to make money on eBay. Didn't really know how until one night I'm watching Inside Edition, and Bill O'Reilly used to host that thing. So Bill O'Reilly was on there talking about Beanie Babies. And this one that we're profiling was called Peanut the Royal Blue Elephant, selling for $1,500. And here I'm pretty naive about that at the time. So I'm like, I need to find me a Peanut. So I skip class the next day, go around to all the Hallmark stores looking for Peanut, can't find him. And I figure out pretty quickly you can't find him because he's on eBay for $1,500. But they had these little gray Beanie Baby elephants for $8, and I'm like, huh. So I bought a gray elephant for $8, stopped by the Kroger grocery store on the way home, picked up a pack of blue Ritz dye, went home, tried to dye the little guy. Found out pretty quickly why I got that D in home economics. They're made out of polyester. They don't hold dye very well. Get them out of the bath, look like they've got the mange. And I ended up ripping a lady off for $1,500. That animal looked like crap when I got through dyeing it, but I found a picture of a real one online, posted it. The lady thought I had the real thing. She won the bid. As soon as she wins the bid, that history of mine of social engineering and scams and fraud kicks in. I send her a message immediately. Hey, I've never done any business with you. I don't know if I can trust you. What I need you to do is send me a U.S. postal money order. Why? Because it protects both of us. You send that to me. Once it clears, I'll send you your animal. She did that. I send the animal out the next week, immediately get a phone call. The phone call I got was, this is not what I ordered. My response was, lady, you ordered a blue elephant. I sent you a blue-ish elephant. And right there was the first cybercrime I committed, but it was also the first lesson of cybercrime that I learned. And that lesson was, if you delay a victim long enough, if you just keep putting them off, a lot of them get so exasperated, they throw their hands up in the air, walk away, and you never hear from them again. And very few, if any, ever complained to law enforcement. So that was the first lesson I learned. And very unsophisticated. I was doing it under my own name, everything else. But I kept going. And as I kept going, I got better and better at hiding identity, at understanding the dynamics of online crime, until finally I moved over into pirated software. Pirated software leads into installing mod chips. So they're the chips that are in the system. So basically gaming systems, you put a little chip in there, it allows you to play pirated software. That led into installing mod chips into cable boxes, cable television boxes, so you could watch all the TV channels, the pay-per-view and everything else, which finally led into programming satellite DSS cards. So the 18-inch RCA satellite systems, you can program the card so it turns on all the pay-per-view as well. So I started doing that. About the same time I did that, a Canadian judge ruled that it was legal for Canadian citizens to pirate satellite DSS signals. So overnight, it sets up an entire little industry in the United States. You go down to Best Buy, buy the system for $100, take it out in the parking lot, open it up, pull the card out, throw the system away, program the card, send it to Canada, $500 a pop. Started doing that, making a lot of money. Had so many orders that I could not fill them all. Thought to myself, why do I need to fill any of them? They're in Canada. I'm down here. Who are they going to complain to? So I didn't fill any of the orders, stole even more money, got worried about how much was coming in, thought I was going to be looked at for money laundering, figured the best thing that I could do is get a fake ID, open up a bank account under that, launder the money through that. I was at university at the time, UK, had no idea where to get a fake ID. So I got online, looked around, thought I found a guy, sent him $200, or sent him $200. Sent him $200, sent him my picture, and he rips me off. And I got pissed. I got really pissed. The result of that was shadowcrew.com. So that was the first organized cybercrime community. The problem was that I still needed the ID, didn't know where to get it, kept looking around until finally found a site called Counterfeit Library. I ended up taking over their forums there, and we built this thing that you see today as modern cybercrime. So before Counterfeit Library and then Shadow Crew, which I built and ran both of those, before that, if you were looking to engage in some sort of organized cybercrime, the only avenue you had was an IRC chat session, an internet relay chat session. So it's kind of this rolling chat board who you have no idea who you're talking to, who you can trust. If you're dealing with someone, what their skill level is, if you're trying to buy a product from someone, a criminal product, if the product even exists, if it works, anything else. Shadow Crew and Counterfeit Library gave a trust platform that criminals could use. That's still in use today. So anytime you see media talk about these forums, darknet markets, anything else like that, that began with Shadow Crew and Counterfeit Library. That's why I'm called this original Internet Godfather. Shadow Crew makes the front cover of Forbes, August 2004. October 26, 2004, United States Secret Service arrests 33 people, 6 countries, 6 hours. I'm the only guy who gets away. They pick me up February 8th, 2005, and the Secret Service gives me a job. It doesn't stop there because I'm the idiot that decides to keep breaking the law from inside Secret Service offices. So I do that for the next 10 months until they find out, at which point I take off on a cross-country crime spree, steal $600,000 in 4 months, placed on the United States Most Wanted list. The day I'm placed on the Most Wanted list, I look at it and I decide that, what are you going to do now, Brett? Well, I'm going to Disney World. So I go to Disney World, last about 6 weeks in Orlando, get caught, sent to prison, escape from prison, get caught again, finally serve out my time. So that's just the bare bones story, I guess you could say.
Well, and what's incredible to me is I saw that story. I watched it on YouTube, and
right.
You said that you had some training or you'd gone to university for acting and theater. You do an excellent job when you're doing your YouTube, your videos, because it is so engaging. It's funny, but it's so serious. And you know, when you say that you don't blame your family or on the nature versus nurture, I remember asking my scammer, why did you do it? And you know what? He immediately went back to, you know, I wasn't with my parents, and over here the economy is bad, and we learned as kids, and part of me wanted to just shake the mothers and say, where are you in this situation?
Sure.
Why aren't you? And I have 3 sons and a daughter. I'm like, why aren't you raising your children better? But like you said, it comes up to choices made as
that's the thing. When you're and I would tell your scammer the exact same thing. It doesn't matter about the economy. Right now we've got 40 million people out of work. 40 million. We've got the worst economic times since the Great Depression, since really the past 150 years. We're in the worst economy ever right now. Even though that's that bad, even though people have had horrible upbringings, it's still a choice, unless you're a minor, because your parents tell you what to do when you're a minor. But when you become an adult, it is your choice. You actively have to choose to victimize someone. So all these people are out of work that are needing money. A lot of them are going to turn toward crime in order to provide for their families. But that is still an active choice to do that. With me, it was an active choice. I chose, and it took me a long time to realize that, because I used to justify my crimes by saying the exact same thing your scammer said. Well, I did it because of the economy, my family, my wife, my stripper girlfriend. No, you do it because you choose to do it. And it's not until, I really firmly believe, that it's not until a criminal really understands that he chose to break the law and victimize people that a criminal can actually repent and move forward and try to do some good and try to find some sort of redemption. I don't think you can find redemption until you really realize that you actively choose, regardless of your background, that you actually choose to victimize someone.
Do you think that would only come after they've been caught and spent time in jail?
I don't think. See, with me, it was not actually the jail. What happens with me is I was married for 9 years, lied to my wife my first marriage. I lied to her the entire 9. It took her 3 years to find out that I was a criminal. The next 6 years were me saying, I've stopped, I will stop, I'm going to stop. You like spending the money, don't you? Until she figured out that I wasn't about to stop, and she leaves. So that fear of being abandoned became real for me. So that kind of starts my whole redemption process right there. So my wife leaves. I go through this horrible depression, get suicidal, everything else, end up picking up the phone and calling a psychologist because I know I'm getting suicidal. Start seeing a psychologist. She tries to get me to stop breaking the law. She actually tried to get me to go into real estate, and I was like, hey, is there any difference between that and crime?
Yeah.
But what happens is I was 34 at the time, and I didn't start drinking until I was 34. So I'm a criminal, but I never used drugs or drank alcohol until I was 34. But I get lonely one night, and I had never been to a strip club, and I'm like, let's try that. So I walked in, and I'm literally the guy who falls in love with the first stripper that he sees. So fell in love with her, found out she was addicted to coke. Not only was she addicted to coke, but she was prostituting herself for the cocaine. And I kind of lost it at that point. I got it in my head. I guess I got it from my head that if I could fix her, I could fix me. And if I just kept on going, we'd have that love. And that was just not the case at all. Now I understand that when someone is addicted to something, they can't love anything else except the addiction. But Then I didn't understand that, and I thought I could fix people, and I understand now you can't fix anyone but yourself, and you're lucky if you can fix yourself. But my sister ends up disowning me because of that. I got engaged to Elizabeth. That was the dancer. I got engaged to her and everything else. I was arrested February 8th, 2005, 3 weeks before I was supposed to marry her. My sister ends up disowning me because of that relationship. So I go through this entire arc of, getting arrested, ripping off the Secret Service, going on a cross-country run, making the most wanted list, going to prison, then escaping from prison. Denise won't take a phone call or anything else during that entire time. I get caught after the escape. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky at a county jail where they've got a 10-minute visitation. My dad comes and visits, and he's like, can I do anything for you? And I'm like, yeah, you can tell my sister I said I love her. And Dad gets on the phone, calls Denise. Denise is pregnant in Hickory, North Carolina, gets in the car and drives those 6-7 hours to come see her dumbass brother to tell me she loves me. And I don't see her again for 5 years after that. And that's the big turnaround for me right there. It took 2.5 years behind the fence in prison for me to really come to terms to understand that, I didn't break the law because of my sister or my family or my wife. I broke the law because I chose to. So I got out in 2011, no taste whatsoever to break the law. Didn't want to get online, didn't want to do anything. I was on probation. I couldn't touch a computer. So I had job offers from Deloitte Consulting for cybercrime consulting, had job offers from KnowBe4 phishing simulation training, a couple of payment processors as well. I couldn't take those because you can't touch a computer. I got to the point I was trying to apply for fast food jobs. Couldn't take those because that's a computer. So I'm like, okay, what about a waiter's position? Probation officer's like, no, that's a computer and credit cards. You're an idiot. So I couldn't get a job, literally could not get a job. I was bumming money from my dad, from my sister. I had a roommate that was taking care of half the rent with me. I was on food stamps so I could eat. Didn't have any money at all, and had a cat. I had this little guy. He was a few weeks old, and I had enough money to feed my cat, and I didn't have enough money to buy toilet paper. So I go to the dollar store one day, and I bought the cat some food. On the way out, they had a kiosk that had toilet paper there, and that was the first crime that I committed when I got out right there. I'm lucky that what happened is my wife now, Michelle, I'd had a friend put an ad up on one of these dating sites, as a matter of fact, Plenty of Fish. Had a friend put up an ad on that, and she contacts me, and I was given that, that classic prison pose where you're not smiling or anything. She messages me, and she's like, why aren't you happy in your picture? And I'm like, that is my happy face. So we start talking, and the first meeting that we had, we were in Destin, Florida, and we're on the beach, and the first time we physically met, we're sitting on the beach, and 10 minutes into the conversation, she's like, well, what's the worst thing you've ever done in your life? And I looked at her, and I'm like, well, I just got out of federal prison. And she chuckles, and she's like, no, seriously, what's the worst thing? And I'm like, I just got out of federal prison. So I told her everything about me, and we went through the date that night. And at the end of the date, I'm like, look, I said, I like you. I'd like to continue seeing you. You're going to go home tonight. You're going to Google me. And she's like, no, I won't. I'll not do that. And I was like, I promise you, you're going to go home and you're going to look me up. She's like, no, I won't. Well, she goes home and she looks me up. And she talks it over with her oldest son. He was in the Navy at the time. And he was like, well, is he a nice guy? And she's like, yeah, I like him. He was like, well, as long as he's not breaking the law, why don't you go see him? Well, we got in a relationship, and I ended up moving in with her a few months after that. Still couldn't get a job, but once I moved in with her, I finally did get a job. And the only job I could get, there was a guy on Craigslist that was advertising for landscaping services, and he was running the business out of his house. I went down there, and his name was Dustin, and sat down and talked to him about 20 minutes on how I didn't know how to do landscaping. And he's looking at me about 20 minutes into the conversation. He's like, can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah. He's like, are you on the run or something? He said, this does not seem like the type of work you would do. So I told him, who I was and what I'd done. And he looks at me, he's like, man, I'm just going to have to think about it. So I go home, and a couple of days later, he calls me up, and he's like, look, he said, if I hire you, will you actually work? And I told him, I said, man, if you'll just give me a job, I will work my ass off for you. So he told me to show up next morning at 7 o'clock, and I did. And my job was to it was to push a lawnmower. I did manual labor. I did 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, $400 a week, and I was happy. I was doing something. I was banging away, and I've never done that before. When I was a kid, I logged some, but I'd come in from doing that lawnmower work, and I'd pass out, wake up the next morning, take a shower, hit it again, and that was my week. And I was happy. I was actually doing something. And what happens is it gets cold. When it gets cold, the job ends. Can't cut the grass when it's cold; it doesn't grow. And that reason I commit crime typically of having to. I'm the guy who it's never been enough for me to just tell somebody I love them. I have to show it through expensive gifts, through overdoing things in relationships. So that pops its head up. I'm not working. Michelle's the only one that's working. I'm like, I got to do something. I got to show her that. I got to show her that I'm worth it. So I figure at the end of the day that at the least I can do is bring food in the house. So I get online, get some stolen credit card data, start ordering food, and I get caught. And I go back to prison for 10 months. At my sentencing on the probation violation, the only people there was the probation officer, the prosecutor, the U.S. Marshals, and Michelle. Well, the judge too. Michelle stands up and she tells the judge that I'm a better dad to her kids than their actual father is. I'm sitting there crying like a baby. The prosecutor stands up and she's like, "We think he's a good guy. We think it's a one-time thing, but who knows?" Probation officer says the same thing. I go back to jail for 10 months, and what happens is that's when I realized that Michelle didn't need me for what I could give her. She just needed me for me, and I had never had that in a romantic relationship before. The only person I'd ever had that with was my sister. So I get out. We get married shortly after I get out. I'm off probation, so I can touch a computer at that point. Still can't get a job, though, because, hey, I'm the guy who's stolen everything. And even to this day, Debbie, I know what my triggers are. I know what it takes for me to go back into committing crime. So I knew it was just a matter of time. I looked at Michelle, and I was like, let me see what I can do. So I signed on to LinkedIn, reached out to this FBI agent. His name's Keith Milarski. He's like an FBI super cop when it comes to cybercrime. He retired last year, but was the best, up until his retirement, was the best cyber agent in the United States, probably the world. Reached out to him, and I was like, hey, I just want you to know I respect every single thing you did. I think you did a great job. No hard feelings. You are outstanding. By the way, I'd like to be legal. And Keith responded within 2 hours. Took me under his wing, gave me references, gave me advice. He does that to this day. Today I speak at Quantico twice a year. Once Keith does that, the head of the Card Not Present group brings me in to speak at their conference. Microsoft comes in and hires me. Today I work with consumer groups. I work with AARP. I work with the FBI. I work with Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies. As you said, I've got a couple of podcasts as well. I've got a TV show in the works, some other things like that. At the end of the day, my thing now is, and it's kind of my tagline, but I try to protect people against the person I used to be. The only reason I'm able to do what I'm doing, the only reason, is that people took me under their wing, gave me a chance to use the knowledge I've got for good instead of bad. If that wouldn't have happened, I'd probably be back in prison for 20 years. And I don't think I deserve the life I've got, but I am damn sure thankful for it.
Well, I'm sitting here, I've got such mixed emotions because, I have a son who had some problems with the law, and as a mom, and I can see it from your sister and your wife's point of view, you want the best for them, and you're frustrated when there's the getting out period is very difficult. You can't find a job, and you just need that one person to believe in you and to help you to move forward. And when you get it, you appreciate it, and I can feel that coming from you, and I appreciate that. On the other side of my life, the survivor side of a $1 million fraud,
right?
And we've talked about that. There's anger because of the deceit and my heart was ripped out of me along with my money. And I trusted my Eric so much that for 2 years I gave him my life. And I know that there are a lot of survivors out there that in this relationship, and it's social engineering. It's not just online dating fraud. It's all kinds of fraud. We are so taught to trust. And I'm trying to think of what kind of mind. The criminal mind is so different than what I would call the normal, regular mind.
You're right.
You're still a person. You're still the basic person. It's just your mind works differently because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm thinking, gosh, so much of what you do is what an entrepreneur is taught to do.
Right.
It's just that criminal element that is just frustrating for me. And you said something once. I've heard this. You say this: that perception of reality is more important than reality itself.
I mean, that's true. I mean, it doesn't. So you talk about trust, all right? The Internet, technology as a whole, people tend to trust that inherently. We're given a device. We don't understand the device, but we trust it. We trust what comes across that device. That's why fake news today is one of the most dangerous things across the planet, because people trust what they see, what they read that comes across that device. The device itself lays a base level of trust, okay? And then for a criminal, whether it be fake news, scams, what have you, the criminal layers additional layers of trust on top of that until he is able to manipulate someone into believing them. It doesn't matter. What's more important to people, to your listeners today? Is it more important that they actually own the account, or is it more important that someone like me can go and convince the bank that I own the account and steal the money out of it? I would argue that that's the more important thing right now. All right, it doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters what I can convince someone of. Same thing with fake news. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters what I can get someone to think about it. All right, same thing with your accounts, anything else like that, or dating fraud. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters what I can convince someone of. That's the reason cybercrime happens. If people were to really take the time to objectively evaluate everything that's going on, those phishing emails, those phone calls that are coming in, anything else like that, if you take the time, step back, just disassociate yourself from what's going on. You talked about in our interview that we did, you talked about a buddy. That buddy allows you to have that objective viewpoint, because it's when it becomes subjective that things start to go south really quickly. So you need to keep that objective viewpoint. It's like Reagan said, and I like, my favorite quote from Reagan is trust but verify. I believe in that because I used to be this criminal, but I'm still this optimist type guy. I believe that you trust everyone out of the gate, but you have to verify everything that they're saying. If we live in a world where we're constantly scared of everything, I think that's a horrible existence. I think we have to be optimistic, but don't trust anyone without verification. So, yeah, you tell me you're this guy. Okay, I'm going to trust you immediately, but you know what? I'm going to need some verification on that as well. And
that's, as a former intelligence officer with the Air Force, I attempted to do that. But
right.
What I call the pink flags, when they came up with the things that didn't quite sound right, he always had a plausible reason. He always convinced me that what I found was not true,
Yeah, and you're dealing with someone. So this guy, obviously, by him being able to do that, this was not his first rodeo.
No.
All right, he was an experienced person on this. He knew the nuances. He knew exactly what people that he was trying to victimize, what their responses were going to be, what they were going to try to look for, because he had been through that before. It's a learning process. It's basically the university of scams. And the way you do that is trial and error. You read some, today you go on one of these forums, these marketplaces, and you learn from the other people there who have been through that school. So they're like instructors. And they teach you how to properly commit fraud or cybercrime or what have you. And then you plug it in and you start doing it yourself and you find out those nuances as well. But it's a learning process for everyone across the board, not just for the scammers, but for the people they're trying to victimize.
Well, that's true. And they don't work alone, right? Because in my situation, there were some times at night when I'd be on Yahoo Chat and I would have an open chat with Eric, that was his name, and then I would have one opened with his attorney, Peter, and then there was another one with his sister and son in England. You know, I'd be writing to 3 different people, or I thought. I don't know if it was all him, if it was 3 different people, or how does that work?
Well, that's one of the things that we found out with Shadow Crew and Counterfeit Library. Just to break down the way cybercrime as a whole operates, okay? There are 3 necessities of cybercrime. Those necessities are gathering the data, committing the crime, and then cashing out. So all 3 of those necessities have to work in conjunction. If they don't, the crime fails. Why even try it? The problem from a criminal point of view is that a single criminal is not good in doing all 3 things. He's good in doing one thing, sometimes 2. Very rarely can he do all 3. So that's why you have these marketplaces, these forums that people read about in the news and everything else. They allow that one specific criminal to network with other criminals who are good in areas where he or she is not. So with these scams that you're talking about, one guy doing the scam is not nearly as effective as a group of people doing the scam. So you have to think about wherever this guy was, and I forgot where you said that yours was located,
he was
but wherever he was.
I found out
Okay,
later.
so he's in Nigeria. They're very good about networking together in Nigeria. So he's manipulating you. He's got associates that are getting online at the same time that are manipulating you, saying that they're children or parents or what have you, brothers, sisters, what have you. So he's got this whole network of people. They've got their story together. When I was doing credit card fraud and things like that, I would have a notebook on each individual victim. I would have a notebook, and you'd have tabs, and you'd flip to each victim so when a bank called and needed information, it was just right there in front of you. You could reference whatever questions were coming through. Scammers on that side do the exact same type of thing. So they've got their story together, they've got their plot outline, everything else. They network together because at the end of the day, he's needing cash from you. That's what he's wanting, is he's wanting cash. Well, these days, that becomes the hardest part of the 3 necessities of cybercrime. How do you cash out? That's why you see a lot of scammers, when they call or something like that, they want gift cards, because financial institutions, even though they still suck, they've gotten a lot better at identifying the types of fraud that are coming by and freezing accounts before the scammers can actually withdraw all the money. So scammers are wanting to get that money out as quickly as possible. So a lot of them use gift cards, prepaid cards, bank accounts, things like that. The problem is that maybe for your Eric or for other people out there, that scammer that's so good about social engineering you online or over the phone, he may not be very good about setting up bank accounts and knowing how to launder the money out. So he's having to rely on other people to do that. So while, and understand, I think we talked about that before as well, you're talking about somebody, they may spend years manipulating you into sending cash over. And while, a few for you is a lot of money, but a lot of the times these scammers, it doesn't seem like it's a whole lot they put in a year and a half to scam me out of $10,000, $20,000. How is that possible? How does that make economic sense? Well, it makes economic sense because that much money over there is a lot of money.
A lot of money.
So it's worth it. And it's not just one victim. It's many victims that they're manipulating at the same time. It's not just you they're talking to. They're talking to multiple people, and that's their income stream. That is their career. That's their business. That's what they do.
Well, it's devastating emotionally.
It is.
And so where's the conscience? When you're in the middle of that, is there any conscience? I mean, what are you thinking?
So, and I've been asked this question a few times. A lot of people call criminals sociopaths. Now, I served 7.5 years. A sociopath is someone who does not recognize the difference between good and bad, all right? If you have somebody that justifies their crimes, now your Eric justified his crimes by saying, I did it because of economic structure, because of my upbringing, blah, 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 blah. So he's trying to justify that. So he knows the difference between good and bad. But you mentioned that one of the differences between the criminal mind and the legitimate or the good guy. And one of those differences is, for me, I think, our morality, our ethics are always situational. It depends on the situation. So if we can convince ourselves as criminals that, well, I'm doing it for my family. I'm a good guy in the real world. I'm just a bad guy online. That's the kind of justification I used. So if you're able to convince yourself of that, that moral compass tends to point whatever way you need it to steal money. And that's why I said earlier, for me, it's very important that you recognize that you chose to actively victimize people. If you can't do that, I really don't believe that you can ever find redemption or, really feel sorry for what you've done to people. I just don't think that's possible for you to do that. So to answer your question, as far as sociopaths, I was at prisons that had a few thousand inmates. I probably met 2 real sociopaths, people who simply did not know the difference between good and bad. The other inmates that are there, they knew the difference. They just chose to break the law and victimize people.
And they got caught. Well, you and I could talk forever. I so find this engaging. We do have guests on the show. I'm going to open this up to Q&A. If anybody would like to ask Brett a question, hit *6 and you can come on and I'll let you in. It's such an intriguing topic, and we talked earlier about elderly crime, and my father got hacked the other day on his AOL account, and it just irritated him to no end. That's happening all the time, and we tried to explain to my mom that, Mom, this is part of life. And she's like, but why?
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me walk through that real quick, because I think that's important for your listeners. So there are 3 things that all the listeners need to do today if they've not, okay? The first thing is to freeze the credit of every single person in your house. That includes the children, because children are the number 1 victims of identity theft. 1 in 4, 25% of all kids will be a victim of ID theft. So credit freezes became free September 18th of 2018. Freeze the credit. That doesn't mean monitor. It doesn't mean credit alerts. Freeze the credit, because when you contact the credit bureaus, and you have to contact all 3, when you contact the credit bureaus, they're going to try to sell you a credit alert package or say, yeah, you don't need the credit freeze, just do the alert. No. Freeze the credit. It's free. Do it, okay? Also, monitor your accounts. Now, when I say monitor your accounts, I mean all accounts. That's your email, your retail, your tax, your credit card, your bank accounts. Monitor all the accounts. Place alerts on the accounts wherever you can. For example, Discover Card has a $0 alert, meaning that if a criminal just gets your card information and he tries to ping it to see if the card's still alive, you get a text message saying, hey, someone's trying to use your card, and then you can do something about it. The final thing, and this is what happened with your father, most people out there, most of the listeners, use the exact same password and login across multiple websites. Now, here's what happens. I can send out a phishing email that looks like it comes from Bank of America. And you'll look at it and you'll say, that's obviously a phishing email. I'm not going to fall for that. Because your level of awareness is high enough for your financial accounts that you're like, I'm vigilant. I'm not going to fall for this. But if you're using the exact same password for your Hulu account, is your level of awareness the same? No. You're going to get that same email that looks like it comes from Hulu, and you're going to say, Hulu, does anyone even watch it? They've only got The Handmaid's Tale. That second season kind of sucked. So your level of awareness is not nearly as high. But if you're using the same password and login, it's an automated program that an attacker like me uses. I go to sleep. It just plugs in those password credentials in multiple websites, hundreds of thousands of websites overnight. Wake up the next morning, see what you've got access to. That's probably what happened to your father. It's called credential stuffing. You get the password and login, and you just start plugging it in different places. So use a password manager.
My mom's like, well, how can you do it? I'm like, Mom, it's not one person trying to do it.
No, it's automated. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's frustrating. Well, the one good thing that came out of it, the silver lining, is that about 100 of my dad's friends reached out to him to make sure he was okay.
Outstanding.
That was good.
I love it.
All right, we have Dr. Tim McGinnis is on asking a question. Tim is the founder of SCARS, and I wanted to introduce him to you. Anyway, Brett.
Sure.
Tim, are you there?
I am here. Hello, Brett.
Hey, Tim. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to finally connect with you. We've been dodging each other for a while on LinkedIn, but I'm
glad
that's
true.
To be able to speak with you.
Cell phone tag, you're it, Tim. Got a question?
Brett, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm aware of your history from a variety of different perspectives. And, what you say about the situational ethics is something that we encounter on so many different levels from so many different directions, not only from the scammers themselves. And I've had conversations with the government of Ghana. We interact directly to facilitate arrests of scammers in Nigeria. I talk to the director of the EFCC literally weekly through LinkedIn as well. But, it's also one where situational ethics applies to law enforcement. It applies to the victim support communities as well. I've been involved in observing cybercrimes now for about 30 years. That is to say, from the early 1990s in terms of directly observing its impact on victims. But my own background goes back a lot further, and in fact, once upon a time, we found let's just say a pirate BBS inside of Atari that was being used to sell credit card information. And our own internal security shut that down. So it goes back 4 decades at least at this stage. One of the things that I always find fascinating about the victims of cybercrime is how readily they throw away their ethics and engage in exactly the same behavior. There's a thing called scam baiting that kind of drives us crazy because victims get trapped in their own anger and hate and become scam baiters as a part of vigilantism. In other words, they not only use their anger and aggression theoretically to go after cyber criminals, but they completely throw out the window their own ethics in the process and do exactly what cyber criminals do. They engage in deception, deceit, social engineering against individual cyber criminals, and in the process, while it could be argued that they're not harming anybody, they're actually breaking the law, and they're breaking a handful of federal statutes in the process. Another aspect of this situational ethical challenge is what happens particularly to relationship scam victims that have been fed a story based around a stolen image or a stolen persona, where the scammer is impersonating a real person using their photos, whether it's a military individual or someone else. And then once they discover it's a scam, then they engage in criminal behavior through cyber stalking and their attempts to track down this real individual. And in many cases, victims can actually make the real impersonation victim, the person whose photo was being stolen, make their lives absolutely miserable. Victims will report them to the police as being a scammer because they refuse to understand the mechanics of what's going on. But, I'm not trying to blame victims, but merely to bring this out as a potential topic for discussion, in that ethics are something that you have to work very, very hard to keep them clear and in focus in the work that you do. And I firmly understand how, it can take a while to really gain that perspective. I've worked in many industries where, particularly as a consultant in large-scale e-commerce companies, and it's astounding how quickly organizations also let the lines blur between what's honest and ethical and what's not. And when you look at the outsourcing industry, and the outsourcing industry in the early 2000s, when more than half of that industry just disappeared, and what was left, a big percentage of them switched to criminal activities, particularly in India and Africa, where they used all of their training and skills and technology that they used for the outsourcing industry, turning it towards various forms of socially engineered cyber-enabled crime, that their ethics went out the window in a heartbeat. So my question, I guess, for you is, how do we as a community of crime prevention professionals, yourself in that role, our organization in that role, as well as being a victims assistance organization, how can we best focus on meaningful impact on the criminal organizations themselves? For example, one of the things that we learned about maybe 6-7 months ago, that many of the cyber criminal organizations around the world, in fact, use a piece of software which is their preference. They use Salesforce to keep track of victims.
Sure.
And to be able to communicate in their organizations and pass victims back and forth. So just like the platform Facebook is an enabler of cyber crimes, we've heard that Salesforce is as well, which is an irony because the founder of Salesforce actually used to work for me back in the early 80s. But
sure.
So what is your suggestion about how to focus on meaningful activities rather than run around with meaningless activities?
Now that is a question. Let's backtrack just a second on some of the stuff that you said. Situational ethics. I think it's important that we first understand that situational ethics is not always a bad thing. All right, if you're going up for sentencing, and you've got someone that is obviously repentant coming in for sentencing. And so, sure, all people who are in front of a judge, they cry, they get watery eyes, I'm sorry. Well, typically you're sorry for being caught, not for the crimes that you committed. But every now and then you'll get someone up there who, their history, their background, things like that, we empathize with them. We put forward that situational ethics instead of just the concrete morality. So situational ethics is not always bad because people are different. They have different stories. I mention that because right now we've got, again, 40 million Americans that are out of work. 40 million Americans that can't make their house payments, their car payments. They can't feed their kids. Now, not all 40 are going to be committing crime, but there's a percentage there that all of a sudden, because they used to have that compass, that moral compass that pointed directly north, but now they're going to have a moral compass that's like, I got to feed my family. I got to pay my bills. I'm going to lose my house. So some of those people are going to have situational ethics. It's understandable. Some of those people are going to get caught. They're going to go in front of a judge. And I think it's important at that point that we do have situational ethics as well when those people go to be sentenced, because those people are not people who would typically commit crime. It's just the pressure. It's like Creasy's fraud triangle. It's the pressure that's came in and has helped tip that compass away from the north. Okay? So I think that's important. I think it's important, too, that we realize that the victim is never responsible for the crime that's perpetrated on them. It's always the criminal's fault. You mentioned victim blaming a few minutes ago. A lot of people tend to blame the victim by saying, how could you fall for something like that? That's stupid. I would never fall for that. I would never click on that. I would never have went out and got $70,000 worth of gift cards from Sephora, as happened last year with someone. We tend to blame the victim. We say it's ignorance, stupidity, they're not educated, what have you. That has nothing to do with it. If you look at spear phishing, so phishing overall is 92% of every single attack begins with a phishing attack. Spear phishing is about 86% successful, regardless of the person that is the victim, that is the target. I don't care how educated, how uneducated, how rich, how poor, how important, how unimportant. Spear phishing is still about 86% successful. The reason is not because of the stupidity of the victim. It's because you're dealing with a social engineer who understands the technology and the psychology enough to manipulate that person into handing over one of four things: information, access, data, or cash. Okay? So it's important that we start to change that discussion from blaming the victim, from saying that it's stupidity or ignorance that results in a lot of these scams. We have to change that discussion, first of all, because what tends to happen is someone's a victim of a scam. They feel stupid. They think their family's going to think they're stupid. Their friends are going to think they're stupid. Their coworkers, they're going to think they're stupid. So they tend to internalize that instead of mentioning it, instead of complaining to law enforcement, instead of talking to their support network to work through that. They internalize it, and it just gets worse and worse. So I think it's important that we change the discussion. I think it's also important, how do you combat cybercrime? I mentioned before that a lot of these criminals, they're simply not sociopaths. They know the difference between good and bad. They choose to ignore the difference, all right? The thing is I think that we also, other than educating media, family, potential victims, we also need to start educating the criminals. I think that if you really, and I think that's a utopian idea that I've got, to be honest with you. I think that at the end of the day, it might not do that good, but I still think we have to get forward and start talking about these are the victims. Just because you think you're stealing from the government with all the stimulus fraud that's going on right now doesn't mean it's just the government that's the victims. You're taking money away. You're taking that unemployment insurance away from people who are out of work who need that money. So I think we need to start having that conversation as well. I think we need to, my thing is, if you're an adult, you need to go to prison if you're breaking the law. Prison did me a lot of good. I know it would do everyone else a lot of good if they'd go to prison for a while. So minors, I think that a minor doesn't need to go to prison at all, that they need mentorship. They need someone to take them under their wing and guide them on the right path. So I think we increase prison sentences. We prosecute. We complain to law enforcement. For law enforcement, you're absolutely right. Law enforcement tends to have situational ethics a lot as well. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we need some accountability with law enforcement as well. There's been a couple of cases, and I absolutely adore the work that the FBI does. I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to work at Quantico. I work with some agencies as well and some other stuff, but we need to have, for especially these agencies that are in the news right now, we need to have some sort of accountability factor in place. I'm not for, we've got a lot of people saying defund the police. I'm not for taking money away from law enforcement. I'm for properly training and having accountability for law enforcement, which seems to be pretty absent in some instances right now. So
Brett, if I can
no short answer. Sure.
On that topic, one of the things I was just going to bring up really quickly relative to law enforcement is law enforcement is listening, and particularly when it comes to cyber crimes. One of the things that's happened in the last 3 years is that every state police in the country have been enabled through DHS funding and others to create an actual cyber crimes unit on the state police level. We're an actual partner with DHS, specifically with CISA. And also about 2 weeks ago, we delivered to several thousand law enforcement agencies around the U.S. our guide for interacting with cyber-enabled crime victims, guide for law enforcement specifically on that basis that has been very, very well received. We're in the process of distributing that elsewhere as well. Could I ask you to make a divergence and talk about the challenge of mules in the time that's left? Because here we have an ethical dilemma where an individual is so deep in their own denial in the manipulation that they have been socially engineered into that they cannot recognize that they are actually an accessory to the crimes being committed against other individuals.
Sure, and you mentioned that we're running short on time. To the listeners out there, if we do run out before I get to your questions or anything like that, you can contact me directly. I'm more than happy to talk to you over the phone, email, whatever, to answer any questions, help you any possible way that I can, okay? And I'm sure Debbie will give my contact information at the end of the show. Money mules. Again, it goes back to those three necessities of cybercrime. The final one, cashing out, because at the end of the day, If you don't put cash in pocket as a criminal, the rest of that work, and there's a lot of work that goes into it, the rest of that work is meaningless. So the most important aspect becomes putting money in pocket. The problem, of course, is that you have to set up accounts. You have to withdraw the money, and it becomes an issue if you're stealing, say you're committing business email compromise, you're stealing $12 million or $30 million, you have that sent to a single bank account, there's no possible way that you can withdraw all that cash in a quick amount of time. So you have to rely on money mules, a network of individuals who are either complicit, they know exactly what's going on, or they don't care what's going on. So the problem, and you mentioned the ones that simply don't know, all right? But understand that there are money mules out there. There are people who are setting up bank accounts, who are cashing checks, who are running gift cards, all these other types of frauds. There are people who are complicit, who either complicit out of a need or a want. So they want to be money mules in order to gain status or clout within cybercrime communities, or it's a money mule out of need. And again, I reference those 40 million Americans right now. They need money. They get an offer they see something on Craigslist or Indeed or Monster or coming across on Facebook that says, hey, I need someone to help me out with X amount to, I don't have a bank account, blah, blah, blah. Can I have some money deposited? I'll let you keep 30% or 40% or what have you. Or simply receive these packages for me, or whatever that looks like. So the criminal is developing a network of people. Now, when I was running Shadow Crew, and it tends to be the exact same way today, the rule is that a relationship will remain viable, and what I mean by that is the criminal and the money mule. That relationship will remain in effect as long as it's beneficial for both parties. So as long as the money mule knows that money is going to continue to come in, that money mule will continue to forward money to the main criminal. As long as the main criminal knows the money mule is happy with the relationship, that main criminal will continue to funnel money or checks or gift cards to the money mule as well. A lot of people, especially the ones that are not really aware of crime happening or doing it out of need, a lot of people don't understand the consequences of that. Because at the end of the day, that money mule typically is uneducated on how to hide their identity or how to properly funnel money out of accounts, launder money without being caught. So law enforcement is going to show up at your door. Whether you're complicit or not, whether you knew what was happening or not, you broke a law. When that happens, you are going to go to prison. Not only that, but your credit's going to be ruined. You're going to owe money to the bank. You're going to all this other stuff. You're going to owe money to the victims, everything else across the board, because they're not going to catch the main criminal that's over in the Ukraine or Brazil or what have you. They're going to catch you, and at that point, you're going to prison. That's, I talked about these people that are out of work, and I think it's important, especially right now, it's important that we have that conversation that even though times are hard, it's important that we remain vigilant and that we choose to do the right thing. I think our government has to help us more than they're helping us. I don't think that $1,200 is going to last 10 weeks, as one person said. But it's just important that we band together and we help people right now and understand that times are bad, but we don't have to victimize each other in order to get through it.
That is so true. You guys, this is a very interesting discussion, and the money mule is a totally different topic, which we would love to, bring you back on another time, Brett, to discuss.
Sure.
We're going to have to, because it's after 10, I value people's time, and we're going to wrap this up. I want people to know how to get a hold of you. I've got them, they can reach you at anglerfish.com. Is that right?
Sure, that's Anglerfish, ANGLERP, as in Paul, HISH.com. Also, because I don't know how many listeners you've got out there, but look, if I am not on a stage or consulting or recording a podcast or something like that, you can call me directly, 850-797-0155. Leave me a message, text me, whatever. I'll help you as much as I possibly can. For consumers, for law enforcement, I don't have any charges.
What's your podcast?
I've got two podcasts. First podcast is the Online Fraudcast. That's at onlinefraudcast.com. It's also available on iTunes, Spotify, etc. It talks about the first season and a half was merchant fraud, just about retail stores and trying to help merchants. We've recently incorporated all types of cybercrime and fraud. So the last 5 or 6 episodes has been handling the types of fraud that most listeners would like to listen to as well. I've also got the Anglerfish podcast at anglerfish.com. It's also on Spotify and iTunes. First season is the Brett Johnson story. Second season started out as interviews. I'm actually rebooting that into a more personal type of thing where we're talking about life experiences and more of the issues that are going on today that people need to listen to and hear about.
Well, that was a fun one because you interviewed me and we talked for a long time.
I did. And yours is coming out, hopefully. It won't be next week, hopefully the week after.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So thank you very much. So folks, try to reach out to Brett. He's a great guy. And, as my father said, do you really want to talk to that man? I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And
Thank you, Debbie.
Your last name makes you a brother by another mother, but I'm married to Johnson by marriage.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time. I could really talk to you for a long time, but we're going to stop this now. I want to thank Benfo Complete for sponsoring us. And if you know anyone who has been a victim to fraud or scam, a family member or anybody that's involved in it, please have them report it to anyscam.com or IC3.com, which is the FBI site. And remember to join my Facebook group, Stand Up and Speak Up. We'll have special information and the replays of these shows. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn off the recording if you'd like to stay on for a few minutes, and Brett will be with us for a few more minutes. But until then, we will talk to you all next week.